Hey, so today I'll be talking about data portability, kind of bringing your data between applications. If you are already familiar with Vana, you might know Vana for use cases around pooling data. So different data DAOs where you combine your data together. But today I'll be talking about individual data use cases, where basically you're connecting your data to your wallet, using it across different applications. Quick intro on me. So I got interested in decentralization because I really liked central banks. I had like a picture of Janet Yellen in my high school bedroom, worked at the Fed, got to MIT and learned about decentralized currencies, started mining Ethereum, and then I got into AI through some research at CSAIL, which is MIT's AI lab. And I always wanted to be able to train models on data sets that I didn't have access to because they were living inside of kind of different big companies. I wanted to start with actually a photo. This is from like the early 2000s at the MIT Media Lab. I was not here, I was a child. But basically what you can see is people thought that as kind of the internet advanced, we were gonna need to figure out how to physically carry our data with ourselves. So they're actually wearing like hard drives on their belts because the view was like, how could you trust anybody else with your data, right? You're just gonna have to bring it along, bring it around with you. And I think that obviously the internet has evolved in a very different way. But I think back to kind of this original vision, which Tim Berners-Lee of Solid Project has also pushed forward a lot. So I think data is a very general term. When we think specifically about personal data, one of the things that it's really useful for is as context, right? So when you're using like Claude or ChatGPT, often the reason why it works well is because it has the right context, right? And if it's making a mistake, often that's because it has the wrong context. I think as AI becomes smarter and smarter, context really becomes the key differentiator. I hadn't looked up this, I actually hadn't looked at this data at all, but this is basically how context windows have been growing over time, and they've been going up by 30x each year, right? So every year we get 30x more context. Sometimes, you know, you're talking to Claude and then you start to run out of context. But the question is really like, where does that context live? And if you want AI to work really well, how do you make sure that you can kind of port all of your context in? Most products use your kind of data and context as their moat, right? So if you're using ChatGPT and you have a bunch of memory in there, typically your memory stays in ChatGPT, right? There's no like easy API to kind of port it over. And I think that this is actually a little bit of an adversarial relationship, right? I think as people have started to use more and more AI agents, often it's like, hey, I want to get my data out. I want to use this as context for an AI, but the platform wants to keep you in their platform, and so they want to make it harder for you to get out. One stat that I found interesting was, so I was looking at basically like how do people use different LLMs and how often do they switch? And fewer than 10% of ChatGPT weekly users even visit like another LLM, right? And so you really have actually quite strong lock-in to a given LLM. Part of this is also because ChatGPT just has the widest distribution. But even like for me, I use ChatGPT for some things, I use Claude for some things, and it's annoying when it doesn't have the context that I want it to have. So often when you think about kind of your context, your data, you assume that it's the platforms, right? So your ChatGPT memory, you're like, oh yeah, that's OpenAI's, it lives there. But if you look at the law, you're actually the legal owner of your data, right? So in the same way that when you put your car in a parking lot, the parking lot doesn't own your car, right? They couldn't just tell you, hey, we're not gonna give you your car back. It's actually the same thing with your data. Data regulation ensures that you can conveniently actually go and access it, right? It ensures they have to give it back to you within some period of time. But even with no data regulation, you actually have full legal right to your data. Just a question, like who has ever requested like a GDPR or CCPA export of their data? Cool. How long did it take you and what platform was it?
Multiple, I mean, like
okay.
Google, Meta, they take a few days.
Okay, a few days. Yeah, so often it takes a while, a few days. Sometimes it can take as long as a month or even up to 3 months if they request extra time. You have to dig super deep in the settings, and then it's also kind of inconsistent, so you'll get like one data export, and then if you're trying to build a time series data set, you get a new one and they've changed the format, and you have to like go and kind of wrestle with it. It's easier with AI, but it's still kind of annoying. So fundamentally, kind of what we're building with Vana is a way to be able to unlock data from walled gardens and put it under users' control, right? So usually your data is sitting in every single platform. It's kind of stuck there. What Vana is So it's really an open network that is designed with data as the core primitive. So you run operations on data, you permission data in the same way that you permission kind of funds with a crypto wallet. But something I'll mention too is like you can have an open network that can transact on data. You can have legal rights to data, but if it's inconvenient to be able to use and actually go get your data, then it's very hard in practice. So one of the things I wanted to share today is actually a new tool that we're rolling out this week called Data Connect. And what this is an open source desktop application that allows you to export your data from across platforms. It's very straightforward, so I'll just actually pull it up. I have a dangerous dev build, so if something breaks, yeah. So right now I'm just connecting GitHub, just pulling this data, gonna see what I grab. But I'll also pull up some of the data. So I actually built this data connector today, Shop app, just testing the latest build. And it basically just pulled all my data from across different, like, any Shopify site. So I guess I was buying like Brian Johnson, I don't know, longevity mix. And it essentially pulls that, and then it all lives on my local machine. So whenever I need it, I can just give it to Claude Code and kind of have that data ready to go. And what I'll mention is like, this is so much easier than going and like getting a GDPR export. And it's just like super quick to be able to use. And then it also refreshes regularly. So you've got your credentials stored there. It'll automatically kind of go and grab your data. Data connectors. So anyone can, all of this is fully open source. Anyone can build a data connector for a platform. I put 1 hour, but I think with Claude Code, you could probably do it in like under 10 minutes. Or maybe you could probably single shot it, like mobile Claude Code, like in the car. So yeah, you basically just pick a platform. It needs to have a web UI to be able to access the data. We were thinking about trying to get dating app data, which would have been interesting, but so Hinge doesn't have a web UI, Tinder does. I think that would be a fun one to build. It's so funny, usually like with developer instructions, it gives more detail, but like basically you just tell an AI to do it. That's like the instructions of how to build a data connector. So yeah, build a Netflix connector that exports viewing history. And then you test it. So it's basically going into a browser, logging in on your behalf, grabbing data. All of it happens client-side. And now you have data that you can't get anywhere else, right? So if you look at what is typically available via API, platforms make that very restrictive, right? So Shopify doesn't have an API that tells you, here's everything you've ever bought, right? They want to keep that data for themselves. But this allows you to get any of that data out. And then you can contribute a PR, and then anybody can port their data in the same way. All of it's local first, so your data is stored locally. Scraping happens client-side. So yeah, Vana is kind of this protocol to take your data everywhere, right? So your data can be stored on your local machine, can be stored, you've got this kind of compute environment running with it, but then you can plug it into the network so that you can use it across different applications and permission it wherever you want. In terms of how it works, so the data is connected to your wallet. Any EVM-compatible wallet works. You sign a transaction to grant access to data, and then once you've signed that transaction, apps can basically query or kind of run compute on your data. And you can grant granular access. So you can say like, yeah, you can see my ChatGPT memory, but I don't want you to see my full ChatGPT history. And then you also can grant someone access to be able to run an operation on your data, but not see the underlying data. So I wanted to talk about kind of some of the design choices around what user-controlled means, right? So I think at a base level, people can agree like you should control your encryption keys. But I think often, who's coming from more of an AI background versus crypto? More AI and then more crypto? Okay, so often in like more of a crypto context with blockchains, you typically don't have federated systems. Is anyone familiar with like Urbit or Solid Project? Those are like cool. So Vana's like has this personal server that's actually quite similar. So basically, you run your compute and you store your data in environments that you fully control. So you basically can be like, I want to use my desktop for storage. If you've downloaded the Vana app, then you might have had to connect your Google Drive because you're actually using your Google Drive for storage. And yeah, I guess this guy from the picture earlier, I honestly don't know if he has both storage and compute in his fanny pack or like in his sunglasses, but there's somewhere on him, he's kind of got that right with him, well configured. There are also options to use like something cloud hosted, because most people don't want to self-host. And then we also plug into decentralized storage. If you want to build apps and agents with portable personal data, this has also become unbelievably straightforward with AI coding tools. You clone the starter repo, and then you tell the AI what you want. As an example, build me a Rick Rubin style application that surfaces poetic learnings from my ChatGPT conversations and Spotify listen history and their relationship. So you can really pull in a bunch of data. There are some biohackers who've kind of pulled in a bunch of data. And then when you ship to, so you'll try it with your own data locally. But when you ship to production and like one of your friends tries their app, they connect their wallet and then they plug all of their data in, right? So anyone who's got their data connected to their wallet can really easily just plug that in. Just to kind of look at kind of what the world looks like without portable data versus portable data. I mean, I've never used an application that tells you, hey, go export your ChatGPT history, wait 3 days, and then come back to this app and like put it in, because it's just too inconvenient. So typically, yeah, you just don't have the context. Sometimes people will build scrapers themselves. Is anyone familiar with CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act? Or gone, okay. So if you've gone down that rabbit hole, basically CFAA is this like law that was designed to prevent hacking. And it was designed to say, hey, you shouldn't be able to hack into somebody's machine. But it's often used by some of the big tech companies to prevent platforms from making it easier to go and let a user take their data out. And so often, if you're trying to build scraping yourself, so something sort of like Plaid, where compute is running server side, you'll get hit with a CFAA issue, which is pretty brutal. So having users scrape their own private data in a personal server, kind of in this environment that they control, is a really unique way to be able to actually do that legally. Yeah, and then kind of finally, I think in the consumer space right now, you want to be able to deliver an amazing experience from day one, right? When the user first interacts with your application, you want to be able to show them like, hey, this works, right? And so I think that having that context from the very beginning is super important. Zooming out a lot, I think that we kind of are living under almost like data serfdom right now. So I was talking to a builder who runs like a creator company, and he's built on the Instagram API. And he was telling me that one of his greatest fears is Instagram blocking his API access, right? And I think that often, so in the days of serfdom, like farmers basically didn't own the land that they were farming on. And because of that, they wouldn't invest a lot in the land, and they were like far less productive. And I think that often when you're building with APIs today, or as a builder, you can just like have the rug pulled out from under you at any point in time. I think that Chris Dixon has actually named this really well, of this kind of attract and then extract cycle. We saw it play out with like Farmville and Facebook, right? Basically, it's like attract people into the platform, but as soon as they start capturing too much value, pull it out from under them. So I think what's really important about data portability is it actually prevents that, right? It gives you kind of this solid land to be able to build on, because the user is literally just taking their data and bringing it into your application. There's a good piece actually by the Obsidian founder called, I think, App Over File or File Over App, which is essentially kind of talking about this framework of really like data is kind of the core thing, and then you're just putting an app on top of it, right? And we can just layer all these different apps on top of files and on top of data, but it should really stay quite portable. So yeah, I would say if you take one thing away, it is that in an AI native era, data portability is very important, both as a builder, because it allows you to kind of build with amazing data sources and have users come in with their data ready to go, and also as a user, just because you don't want to be trapped in a single platform. You want your AI to perform really well because it's got really good context. So I have a link to download Data Connect. This is just like the bundled desktop build. We're just rolling this out, so there are honestly a bunch of bugs in the release, so be warned, but good time to go in. If you have a consumer application where you want to integrate portable data and get access to the sorts of data sets that you really just can't get anywhere else, this is how you integrate it. And then finally, if you want to create a data connector, that's relatively straightforward. I think that like there are so many, like the conversations today and so many people in this room are all kind of working towards this vision of like, how do we prevent centralized AI from having too much power, right? We want some kind of decentralized approach. We want sovereignty, and we want superintelligence. And often, it's almost like such a big problem. It's like, well, what do I do tactically, right? And so I have something you can do tactically, which is to build a data connector. Just choose one data source, build a data connector for it, and you're kind of building this bridge from the centralized walled gardens where data exists today towards a more self-sovereign option where you're just kind of storing it on your machine and running it locally. So that's my whole presentation. Happy to take any questions. So I think the biggest barrier to adoption is actually the user experience, because it's really inconvenient to go get your data from platforms. It's kind of intentionally inconvenient. But it's getting better. So actually there's really good data regulation, which just got passed in Utah, which we were involved in kind of helping to shape. It's going to affect this summer, and it allows for programmatic data portability, kind of full API access. They're redoing GDPR right now. Meta has a lot of lobbyists pushing it one way, but we're kind of trying to advocate. It's actually really interesting where kind of meet these policymakers. Talking to the guy who pushed the Utah thing through, he was telling me that he met some of the tech people, and they were like, it's all big tech lobbyists. They were saying, you can't do this. It would be so small. It would be so hard for smaller companies. It would be a huge burden on them. And then I guess he just knew some tech founders who like ski in Utah or something. And they were like, this would be amazing. Like this would level the playing field for us so much. So yeah, I think that part of it, like regulatory and UX. And then I think also just awareness. Like if you told someone 3 years ago, hey, you should own your data, they'd be like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? But I think that now with AI and kind of thinking about you should own your memory, you should own your context, that matters. And then I would also just say the existing incentive system is set up to really extract a lot of value from that platform lock-in. So there's kind of a lot of forces at play that make that hard to fight. Thanks for the question. Yeah,
First of all, it's like super awesome. Like it's the simple interface to connect all your data, and then I know there's a lot of complexity underneath it. We tried to build it a few years back, so super awesome. One question, like as sites are blocking access to agents, what are your thoughts? How to build resiliency into approaches like this, and how you're thinking of adding more features to that?
Yeah, it's kind of always a trade-off, right? So one of the limitations right now is to use the scraping, you have to download a desktop app. Most people like don't want to download a desktop app, right? We have a mobile app, but it's more limited in terms of what it's able to access. And so it's super tricky. We've looked at some automated kind of scraping approaches. I'd say it's a combination of issues. One is you do just get blocked. You can use residential IPs and stuff, but one of the issues, so I think now we kind of operate at the scale. So we've had like over 1 million users connect their data. We operate at the scale where we do get pushback. So like the Reddit data DAO got a cease and desist from Reddit. The Spotify one late last year got some issues with Spotify. So because of that, I think we're in a unique position where the platforms also pay attention. So we also run into the CFAA issue, which is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So we need to make sure that the environment in which any data is being scraped is actually controlled by the user. So we're working on, I think the ideal experience almost looks like Plaid for personal data, right? You just put your credentials in, but it's quite tricky. We're trying to get as close as possible to that. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
Because I was having this conversation with, I don't remember who it was, someone yesterday, like Yurkan,
Yeah.
and he was just like, honestly, people don't care. Like, they just want what works, and like that's where the market is, right? Like, that's why like ChatGPT works. Like, that's why all of these companies are worth like trillions of dollars. Like, I care, but it's like the vast majority of people don't care, and they don't even know to care. So like.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how you frame it to them, right? And I think that like the abstract, I was talking to like a sort of a journalist, activist about this data. I'm trying to get like almost like revolutionaries and activists to help me figure out how to translate data ownership into a message that is more understandable. But their eyes like literally glaze over when I'm like, here's Data Connect, you know, you can connect your data. Because it just like, they don't relate to it. They don't even use ChatGPT, right? So I think that right now, a very small percent of people care. I think that if you framed it in terms of like economic inequality and like honestly the suffering that's going on across the world because of such concentration that's happened of all these really concentrated business models, especially in tech, that come from the ability to have a really strong moat, if you connect that to data, I think that it matters more. But yeah, TBD. I think it depends on how you frame it to each person, right? There's a community of biohackers that pool their data on Vana. I don't think they care that much about ownership. They just care about being able to like run some longevity experiments, right? And so I think that the way you frame it for each person is quite different. And then the other thing I would say is that the voices that care are often a lot quieter, right? The voices that are loud are like big tech lobbyists, right? The voices that are quiet are like someone, I was talking to someone who was starting like pharma thing, and she was like, okay, I have this algorithm that works. I know I need this much data, but the only people who have it are the pharma companies. So so she's like, well, what could I, she's like, can your platform be like 3 years along? And I'm like, well, no, we don't have that much medical data right now. But yeah, I think like step by step, and it takes time.
What's your take on monetizing your data? Because that could be an interesting opportunity when you own your data.
Yeah, I think that for the right user base, monetizing your data makes a lot of sense, right? And so a lot of the pools of data on Vana, so we have this primitive data liquidity pool where you can pool data of similar types. Some of them operate as a data DAO, where they're basically pooling their data and they're making joint decisions over their data. And some of them do choose to sell their data. So like the Spotify one was selling data to like a music AI company. I think that it really depends. Like some people's data is worth a ton. So for example, if you have a Tesla and you like drive by like a kid almost running across the street or some edge case, that you can sell to a self-driving company for like $50 to $100, right? So that actually is like very valuable. But then some long tail data, its value kind of changes. So yeah, it depends. The other thing that I think we're kind of shifting towards is almost like attention traces as data, right? So you see kind of the deal like with Thrive and OpenAI where you're actually taking an operating business and then you're trying to have everyone who works there basically just like have all of their knowledge work go in. And I think most people wouldn't necessarily think of that as data today, but that is extremely valuable data, right? Because you're actually building like a knowledge worker. Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of these big tech companies, like especially AI companies, have spent so much money on buying data from, let's say, Facebook or other Reddit and whatnot. So I'm curious, like, if it's your own personal data, like if these companies already trade from the internet, like the entire internet, plus a bunch of other personal data they bought from Facebook and whatnot, like how much, like who would buy this data right now? Because if it's not these big AI companies who already have so much data to work with, like who could it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one thing, most of what people train on as kind of the massive pre-training corpus of like 15 trillion tokens, it's mostly the public internet, right? And so that actually represents a very small percent of overall data in the world. It's like 0.1% of the data is publicly available. And often people assume, oh, they've already trained on my WhatsApp messages, right? But actually, they don't have the right to train on your WhatsApp messages, and they're end-to-end encrypted. So I think there's more data than one realizes. But it honestly depends, right? I think that in some cases, they do need more data of a certain type. In other cases, they don't. And then the other thing I think about is like, so you can picture like public data, and then you can picture like all private data that requires like a login to access. And then picture like an even bigger circle, which is basically all data that could be generated in the world in the future, right? So like recordings of conversations, like rewind AI type stuff, even just like robots going out and about. And I think that that data is actually a lot of what people want to train on. A lot of what the labs are buying right now is like having people generate very specific data sets to solve a specific, so I guess it's basically to improve on a specific benchmark. But yeah, it changes super quickly. That's a good question.
So I'm really intrigued on this Reddit pushback or like Spotify pushback. So what's the theory under which they would cease and desist if like the users are just submitting their own data?
Yeah, so it is basically whatever they can find to complain about. So with Reddit specifically, they were saying users don't have the right to do this. And it was a mainstream kind of tech journal, I think a TechCrunch journalist was writing about this. And they said it's okay that users can export their data. They have a legal right to do that. But this is an abuse of our legal export system. So there's actually a hilarious thread there on the Spotify one. An Ars Technica reporter wrote an article about it. And the sort of framing that Spotify had was like, they can't do this. It's an abuse of the data export system. And one of the commenters was like, actually, you know, I kind of want to find that comment because it's so funny. And it captures it perfectly. Okay, so I need to dig in the comment section. Let's see. Okay, so Spotify's spokesperson said, all of our users can receive a copy of their personal data to use as they see fit. And then the commenter says, as they see fit, such as uploading their data to pool with other users' data for analysis. So exactly that, right? And so to be honest, like, I don't think they have that much to stand on. But I would also say, so the founder of the Spotify Data DAO is he's a Ukrainian developer who's kind of a refugee in Canada. He got so freaked out by the cease and desist, right? And so I think that like even it was to him. It's to the data DAOs, yeah. And so it scared him. Like we have a legal team, et cetera, on the Vana side, but he didn't have that. And we were like, look, we support you in all of this. We think you have a right. It's okay. But it is definitely scary. The Spotify one specifically, they were saying that the term unwrapped was a violation because of wrapped. So maybe that could have stood up. But yeah, I mean, they'll kind of do anything. I mean, I honestly expect it to get worse. It can help us from a PR perspective. Like because Spotify was pissed, this got a lot more coverage. And people who don't otherwise know about Vana were kind of coming into the ecosystem and learning about it. But yeah, it's just a battle, right? When there's someone in power and you're shifting things around, they will do things to try to prevent that. Okay, thanks so much. I'll be around if there are any questions. Appreciate them.